If you can't follow my rules, then get out and don't ever come back." My mother-in-law's words cut through the air as she hurled a cold beer straight at me. That day was my mother's funeral. My heart was already heavy with grief, but she didn't care. She wanted me to throw her a birthday party on the very same day my mother had passed away. Would I really not even be allowed to say my final goodbye? I had put up with her treatment for years, biting my tongue and enduring it. But this was the last straw. I had given so much to this household, and if they were fine letting me go, then so be it. They could figure things out without me. "Understood," I said with a polite smile, wiping the beer from my face. "Take care." Then, without another word, I turned and walked out, still wearing my mourning clothes. When I arrived at my family home, my sister, Andrea, was already waiting for me. As soon as I explained what had happened, she nodded and smiled. "Well, looks like it's just like old times. Let's live together, the three of us with Lucas." And just like that, I made up my mind. I was never going back to that house. My name is Sydney, and I'm 47 years old. I work part-time at a local pharmacy, just 3 days a week. I've been married to my husband, Sebastian, for 20 years, though we never had children. To be honest, marrying Sebastian was probably the worst decision of my life. There have been countless days when I asked myself why I ever said yes to him. Before we got married, I had a good career in the PR department of a medical company. That job introduced me to a lot of people, including Sebastian. He was a wardrobe staff member who assisted us during events, always eager to help. At first, he seemed kind and attentive, always saying things to make me feel special. One night, when my car broke down, he rushed to help. "Sydney, are you okay? You're not hurt, are you?" I sighed in relief. "Thank you for coming. I was completely lost here. Don't worry, I'll check under the hood. Just sit tight." I watched as he worked, his hands moving confidently, and sure enough, within minutes, my car roared back to life. When he looked up at me, I felt something shift between us. From that moment, we started seeing each other. Eventually, talk of marriage came up. "Sydney, you're such a beautiful woman. Any man would be lucky to come home to you every day." That was when I told him, "You know, I actually have a twin sister, Andrea." His expression shifted slightly, like he hadn't expected that. It was subtle, but I noticed. At the time, Andrea was already married, working as a model, while I was climbing the corporate ladder. I later realized that Sebastian had originally been more interested in Andrea. He must have seen me as a second choice, a replacement. But I was too blinded by love to see it back then. Eventually, we got married. Looking back, I think Sebastian always felt the need to prove something to me. Maybe that's why he insisted I quit my job after the wedding. I wasn't entirely on board with the idea, but I gave in. I loved him, so I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. If I was going to sacrifice my career, though, I wanted something in return. I wanted children. A family of my own. If we had a child, I thought, at least I'd have something truly meaningful in my life. But it never happened. From the very start, Sebastian never even tried to build a home for us. Instead, he told me we would be living with his mother. "What?" I asked, stunned. "You never mentioned that. Mom's been alone ever since Dad passed. I'm her only son. Of course, we have to live with her." I wanted time alone with my husband, a chance to settle into our new life together as a couple. But Sebastian ignored me. No matter how much I protested, he never wavered. So, that's how we started our married life. Not as two people building a future together, but as a trio, with my mother-in-law always in the middle. I felt like an outsider in my own home. She had no boundaries, no sense that we were a married couple who needed privacy. She barged into our bedroom whenever she felt like talking to Sebastian, and the worst part? He welcomed it. He never once asked her to give us space. Meanwhile, my sister Andrea was preparing for marriage as well. Since it was just the two of us, no other siblings, our parents hoped one of us would inherit the family home. "I'll take over the house," Andrea told me one day. My fiancé agreed to it too. That was an unexpected relief. "Thank you, Andrea." Sebastian refuses to live anywhere but his mother's house, so this helps a lot. "It doesn't matter which one of us inherits it," she said. "Let's just make sure we stay close, no matter what." She got married, moved into our childhood home, and after struggling for years to conceive, she was finally blessed with a baby boy, Lucas. I visited them all the time. Seeing Andrea with her child only made me want my own even more. I had a conversation with my doctor who told me, "It's not impossible for you to conceive, but you and your sister have a genetic predisposition that makes pregnancy difficult. If you're serious, you should consider fertility treatments." I was shocked. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? I don't have time to waste. Lucas's birth had awakened something in me. I threw myself into trying to have a child. But there was one major obstacle, Sebastian. The sweet man I had married had long since disappeared. Now he was cruel, cold, and dismissive. "God, you really let yourself go," he scoffed one day. "I thought marriage would make you look better, but you've turned into such a frump. How am I supposed to have a kid with someone like you?" His words cut deep. "You're the one who told me not to wear makeup at home." I shot back. "If you want me to dress up every day, fine, I will. It's too late for that. I already know what's underneath. You're just an ugly woman hiding behind a mask of makeup." That was the moment I realized something. If I weren't Andrea's twin, if we didn't share the exact same face, I might have let it go. But in insulting me, he was also insulting her. "Sebastian," I said, my voice steady, "when you insult my face, you insult Andrea's too." For the first time in a long time, he looked caught off guard. He never mentioned my looks again. But that didn't mean he stopped hurting me in other ways. And the worst part? His mother was no different. If anything, she seemed to enjoy belittling me, treating me like a lowly servant in her house. "Why haven't you dusted this area yet?" she snapped one morning. I swear, I can't stand educated women. They have no common sense. I forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry. Please let me know what else needs to be done." "That's right. You wouldn't notice on your own. I bet you were just as useless at work." Her insults only got worse when she found out Andrea had divorced. "You two are exactly the same, completely incapable of keeping a husband," she sneered. "I doubt you'd be any better at raising kids." As much as I tried to keep my cool, there were limits to my patience. And the day of my mother's funeral? That was the day I finally snapped. When Andrea moved to serve her a cup of coffee, I quickly stopped her. "Don't bother," I said firmly. "If you give her anything, she'll never leave. We're not family anymore, so I'd rather she not step foot in this house." My mother-in-law let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. My, such bitterness," she muttered. "I'll be in the other room. Handle this however you want," Andrea said, rolling her eyes as she walked away. I sat across from my mother-in-law, making sure to keep my distance. The tension in the room was thick, but something was off. The woman who had always been so domineering now sat hunched over, her usual arrogance replaced by something that almost resembled defeat. I cut straight to the point. "Why are you here?" Surely the woman who had demanded I throw her a birthday party instead of attending my own mother's funeral wasn't here out of respect. She hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Well, I wanted to say a prayer for her. Then she forced a small smile. And I'm relieved to see you looking well. She was one of our few relatives, after all. Her sudden politeness made my stomach turn. Just say whatever you came here to say and leave, I told her bluntly. I have no interest in reconnecting with you. I surprised even myself with how direct I was. But for the first time, it felt good to speak my mind. My mother-in-law shrank even further in her seat and spoke in a thin voice. I I need to borrow some money. Your mother used to lend me money when she was alive, so I thought I might ask you. I stiffened. How much did you borrow from her? She hesitated before answering. About $20,000. I narrowed my eyes. And you thought you could just come here and ask for more? She tried to change the subject. You have this big house, don't you? I even heard you own the mountain behind it. I crossed my arms. Yes, I do. At least I do now. Not you. If I were still married to Sebastian, she would have already been scheming to sell everything I owned as if it were hers. Don't be like that, she pleaded. Won't you at least consider it? We're in serious financial trouble. Sebastian fell for some investment scam and lost almost all our savings. I leaned back, unmoved. That's unfortunate, but Sebastian has a job, doesn't he? He can pay it back little by little. Her expression darkened. Well, he was fired yesterday. He took company money and they found out. I didn't react. I just watched her, letting the weight of her own words settle in. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even angry. I felt nothing. If anything, I found a strange sense of amusement in watching them fall apart. Please, she begged, her voice more desperate now. I know we've had our differences, but we were family once. Sebastian feels terrible about everything, and if you're willing, we wouldn't mind reconciling. That was the funniest thing I'd heard in years. I actually laughed out loud. She scowled. What's so funny? Did you think I rushed the divorce to stop you from getting your hands on my money? I asked, shaking my head. That never even crossed my mind. But it turns out it was the right decision. And I have never been so relieved to have gotten out when I did. She reached for my hand. Please, Sydney. If you don't help us, we'll lose the house. We'll have nowhere to go. I yanked my hand away. Not my problem. I gave up my career for Sebastian. I gave up my home, my independence. And for what? Nothing but years of misery. She wasn't the only one who had suffered. I had too. But at least I had the sense to walk away. Even just 10,000, or even 2,000, she begged. I swear, I'll pay it back. I'll double it and return it to you tomorrow. I frowned. Are you gambling now? She flinched. There's no way you can return that kind of money in a day unless you're up to something shady. I continued. It's not like that, she insisted. I've always had good instincts. I can feel it. Today's my lucky day. That was enough for me. I wasn't getting dragged into their mess. Please, Sydney, she said again, her voice shaking. I stood up abruptly. No. I walked to the door, grabbed her arm, and pushed her toward the hallway. She tried to stall, lingering at the entrance, but before I could say anything else, Lucas appeared with a handful of salt and threw it at her. Out, he said sharply. She gasped, stumbling as she rushed away down the street. Not long after, I received confirmation that my divorce had been finalized. Sebastian and his mother were no longer my problem. For the first time in years, I felt free. But something inside me still burned. During this time, I reconnected with some old work colleagues. I started having long, serious conversations about my future. And then, just as I was finding my footing again, Sebastian showed up at my door. I should have slammed it in his face. but some part of me was curious. I let him into the guest room, keeping my distance. He immediately tried to get too close, so I moved away, forcing him to sit at the farthest seat. "So," I said, not letting him set the tone, "I heard about the investment scam. How are things now?" Sebastian's eyes lit up as if he had been waiting for this. "Actually, I have another opportunity," he said eagerly. "This one is different. It's real. I just need some seed money to get started. Could you lend me a little?" I let out a heavy sigh through my nose. "Another investment?" I said flatly. "Sebastian, technology is so advanced now they can make fake videos and even voices sound real. Stop chasing get-rich-quick schemes and get a real job." He scowled. "Even if I try, Mom spends everything I make. I can't just keep grinding away like this. I need to go for something big. Like mother, like son." I muttered under my breath. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You two love to talk about responsibility, but the second things get hard, you want an easy way out." Sebastian's expression darkened. "You make pennies working 3 days a week. Don't act like you're doing better than me." I smirked. "Actually, my old company asked me to come back." Sebastian's mouth twitched. "They've been expanding into anti-aging products, and they want me as a sub-leader for development." I continued. His face twisted with jealousy. "Why do you get everything so easily?" he spat. "You got an inheritance. You get a job handed back to you. Meanwhile, I try so hard, and I get nothing. That's not fair." I tilted my head. "Fair? You made your choices, Sebastian. I made mine. The difference is, I actually followed through on mine." His jaw clenched. "You're just lucky," he muttered. "Luck has nothing to do with it," I said. "I built my future while you sat around complaining about yours." His hand clenched into a fist. "I could do what you do if someone gave me the chance." "Then go find someone willing to take that risk," I said, "because it's not going to be me." He stared at me, his face turning red. I pulled out my phone. "If you stay here any longer, I'll call the police. And we both know you have plenty of problems you don't want them knowing about." His face twisted in rage. Then, without another word, he stormed out. That was the last time I ever saw him. Their house was eventually sold to pay off their debts. But before the money could go to their creditors, I took my share as compensation for the years of suffering they put me through. Sebastian disappeared soon after. His mother now spends every night standing outside, waiting for him to come home. As for me, I returned to my job, quickly climbing the ranks again. Lucas, meanwhile, became a well-known model, and his career is taking off. Andrea and I still live together, and for the first time in decades, I can finally say I'm happy.